Hello, my name is Jordan, and I made the Light as a Dream hot rolls for my project. Going over the ingredients, I used 1 3/4 cup of whole milk, 4 tablespoons of shortening, a half a cup of granulated sugar, 2 cups of bread flour, 3.5 teaspoons yeast, 2 eggs, an egg yolk, a half and a 4 tablespoons stick of butter, 1 cup baking powder, 1 cup baking soda, and 1 cup of salt. So the first thing that I did for this recipe is scalding milk to 180 degrees. The reason I did this, or it is necessary, is because it deactivates the proteins in the milk, and it helps gluten activate at a higher rate. It also can enhance the flavor of the bread once you're done scalding the milk. So I scalded the milk for a little bit, continually stirring it and scraping the bottom just so that it doesn't clump up, and then continue doing that until it hits 180 degrees. Once the milk became heated up to 180 degrees, I removed it from the stovetop and added the shortening to the milk and started mixing it in the milk with the spatula. And after adding the shortening and mixing it up, I add half a cup of sugar into the milk mixture. After this, you want to let the milk cool off for about 5 minutes, and so then I began prepping in another bowl, adding 2 cups of bread flour and yeast, and the yeast to this separate bowl. After you add that, you want to add the cooled off milk mixture now to the bowl you put the flour and yeast in, and mix it together. You can't do this using a dough hook. However, I did not have one while making this bread, so instead I chose to use a wood spatula to mix my ingredients. After mixing the ingredients together, you want to let it sit. I ended up putting mine in the microwave because I have a ornery dog that I did not want to get it into my mixture. So put it in the microwave, and then I came back in about an hour and a half or so. So this is what the bread looked like after it rose. And you let it rise, you want to mix it about 10 rotations. After I finished mixing the mixture, I ended up putting it back in the microwave to let it rise for another hour after that. After letting it rise again, I put half a cup of flour onto my table and began hand kneading the dough. I did this since I didn't have a dough hook or a mixer. It started off very sticky, but once I started kind of kneading it and getting it getting it more with more flour in it, started working pretty nicely. So I start off with half a cup of flour, and then once that got mixed, I added another half a cup until I added 2 additional cups of the bread flour into my dough. So after adding the additional 2 cups, this is what my dough looked like afterwards, and I decided to kind of shape it up into a ball and press down on it. I did this to see that if it would bounce back up, because after you knead dough, the yeast should be able to kind of morph back to its original shape after you put a finger in it. After hand kneading the dough, I put it back in the bowl and let it sit for another hour. And so this is what it looks like after I let it sit. Then I punched the dough down. This is supposed to help distribute the heat and food, and it also kind of helps prevent yeast clusters within the dough mixture. Then after this, I added 2 eggs to the dough and a half a stick of melted butter, which is the equivalent to 4 tablespoons. And then I also added the additional egg yolk too. After adding this, I decided to start mixing it with the rest of my dough. I began with using my hands to mix it, just because I figured the dough would be pretty hard to kind of use the spoon. So I try to get it as mixed with my hands as possible. Then I eventually switch over to using the wood spoon once it became kind of a wetter form of the dough. And then after I did this, I let it put it in the refrigerator and let it stay there overnight. So the next morning, this was what my dough looked like after staying in the refrigerator. It kind of expanded, and then my next thing I did was sift 1 cup of the bread flour, a half a tablespoon of baking soda, and 1 tablespoon of baking powder, and 2 teaspoons of salt to add to the dough mixture. And then I began mixing it with my hands, and after that I went ahead and tried dividing the dough up as evenly as possible by kind of cutting it and eyeing it down the middle. I didn't have a weight scale or anything to kind of help me use that, so I did it all by eyesight, and I formed balls from the dough to begin my experiment. So for the different ways of baking the dough, I chose to put some in a muffin pan, and then I also decided to make some together in a baking pan, or like a loaf pan. Instead of doing 6, I only did 4, just so that I'd have enough dough for the other ways that I can do. And then going in deeper with it, I decided to use the butter glaze on half of my baking pans each. So I applied it to one side and not the other side, just to see what effect that would have when it comes to the looks of it after it comes out of the oven, and the taste. And then I also decided to do the water in the oven. So I ended up baking 1 muffin pan with the water in the oven, and then 1 without the water in the oven step, just to see what sort of differences it would make. The kind of what I was planning on experiencing was that the water in the oven rolls that I make, I figured those would turn out lighter and with a lighter color. They wouldn't be as crisp as without the water in the oven, just because while using the water in the oven, it allows the doughs to kind of keep its soft texture. So that's the first thing I kind of was expecting. The second thing, I didn't really know what to expect with the butter versus non-butter, so I kind of left that up to just see what would happen. And those were the ones I ultimately chose to do. I also ended up cutting slices in my bread, and I did this to kind of let the oxygen kind of, or help kind of release some of the oxygen while it's baking, so that one area isn't getting too much heat. So I already put the water in the oven to begin the steaming, put that at a 475 degrees. Then now I am adding the rolls and dropping the oven to 375 degrees while they bake and rise. I decided to put one of my muffins in as long as with the loaf as well, so that both of them would have the steam in their baking processes. So this is the results of the first muffins that I bake. I actually end up switching these labels around, so the no butter is actually on the left side and the butter is on the right side. The butter turned out a darker color in certain areas, with the no butter being the lighter one. And then these were the ones that I decided to bake in the loaf, and they turned out the brightest probably. One quick note too is that I checked to make sure the inside of the rolls were within 200 degrees or temperature wise, and the loaf actually ended up taking longer, and I think it was just because it had more of the dough within a certain range of each other, whereas other ones were more separated. Looking at the inside, I didn't really see much of a difference. I think maybe the left one had a little more oxygen bubbles in, but I couldn't really tell. And then this is the result. The ones on the left are the ones that I had without the steam. They ended up coming out much darker and more crispier as well, which is exactly what I kind of was expecting, was the darker complexion and the different texture as well. And then this was inside of the difference of the no butter with steam and the without steam and the butter without steam. Again, looking closely, they both have oxygen bubbles. Probably the one on the left has more visible ones, at least, so the butter ones end up having more, but not really too sure about that. After baking this bread and going through this recipe, I really enjoyed it. I think I had some great takeaways and kind of learned some more techniques with it as well. I ended up giving some to my mom to try, and she said she really enjoyed the ones with the steam in the oven, and she's made bread before without that, so I think she's actually going to end up adapting it as something she ends up doing. So but yeah, that was really interesting. I hope you guys enjoyed my bread making video, and I can't wait for the next one.